Welcome to today's webinar. As a global consulting firm, Protiviti is here to help you connect, grow, succeed. We invite you to visit us online at protiviti.com/webinars to find other great content and subscribe. Now, let's begin.
Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining Protiviti and Robert Half's webinar today, which is all about helping you set your ERP implementation programs up for success. Now, before we start, I would just like to recap on some key pointers for today to ensure that you gain the best experience and get the most out of today's session. You may have already seen the guidance on this, but we would recommend using Google Chrome to access this platform. If you do experience any issues throughout the session, then please feel free to update your browser. We will be recording the session and it will be available to watch afterwards on demand as well. And there is a Q&A function available, so please feel free to pop questions in here throughout the session. We will be answering some of the questions later on. If we don't get to all the questions, though, we will be responding individually to those after the webinar as well. So let's get an introduction to your speakers who will be joining me today. First of all, I'm Charlotte. I'm Associate Director at Protiviti within our Change and Transformation practice, and I have a specific focus on the people side of change. Mahendra Balasaria is one of our Managing Directors and Senior Leaders within the UK. He looks after our technology modernization and enterprise architect practice. And finally, Michael Melrose is a Director in our UK business and leads our finance transformation practice. Now, some of you may not have heard of the two sides of our business, both Protiviti and Robert Half, so I'll just provide a very brief overview before we get started. Robert Half is a leading talent solutions provider, offering skilled professionals across a whole host of areas, including finance, accounting, technology, change and project, and others. Protiviti is a subsidiary of Robert Half, and we provide expert consulting services in risk management, internal audit, technology, business process, data analytics, and much more. And together, we combine both deep industry knowledge and a broad talent network to deliver comprehensive solutions across both staffing and consulting. So again, welcome and thank you for joining us today. And let's get into the topic for the session, which is really around setting your ERP initiatives up for success. Now, a commonly cited statistic is that by 2027, over 70% of recent ERP implementation programs will have failed. And put simply, this means that these initiatives will not have met their original business case objectives. However, what is quite alarming is that 25% of these programs will fail catastrophically, potentially resulting in significant financial setback, reputational damage, and talent attrition. So the question is, as you are embarking on your ERP implementation initiatives, how do you make sure that you are not part of that 70%? And I hope that is what has drawn you to this webinar today, and we will be covering a number of topics to help you answer this question. We will be delving deeper into the risks of not conducting a foundational phase for your ERP implementation programs, how in fact to set yourselves up for success through a phase 0, and some of the benefits of doing so. We will be weaving real-life examples throughout the session today. I would note as well that we are focusing today on setting your ERP initiatives up for success. However, the topics and strategies that we will be discussing can be applied much more broadly. This is not just applicable to ERP. These are foundational strategies that can be applied to any large transformation program across your business. It is also not simply constrained to ERP technology per se. This is about building the capabilities, understanding the mentality to be open and responsive and to enable you to embrace and optimize technology-related change in the future. I will now hand over to Michael, who will set out the why in relation to conducting a foundational phase for your implementation program.
Thank you, Charlotte. Good afternoon, everyone. I thought it would be helpful to start with a bit of a story about a global client headquartered in the UK whose story might sound a bit familiar. So to set the scene, this client's a multinational national organization with a bold ERP vision. Single standardized ERP rolled out across all of their markets. And their business case was really built on some pretty aggressive timelines and tight budgets. And they had a simple mindset: get it done fast, standardize everything, and leverage out-of-the-box functionality. Very quickly, though, things started to go wrong. Individual divisions started to push back, particularly on areas that had commercial implications. It seemed like nobody wanted to give up control of their unique processes. And unfortunately, difficult conversations about some of these trade-offs were never made at the executive committee level, and leadership wasn't aligned, and critical decisions ended up being avoided. And the project also faced a lot of leadership and governance challenges. The CTO, who was the executive sponsor, left midway through the project, and a divisional leader stepped in who had a very different mindset. And that mindset was just get it over the line, and that really became the new tone for the project. The governance structures didn't evolve to meet the complexities of the program. And unfortunately, leadership didn't want to hear bad news. And the culture was really conflict averse. Internal audit later conducted a formal review and concluded that the program team didn't have the capability to deliver. So in addition to some of the leadership and governance challenges, there were also several technical and operational gaps. As I mentioned, the client wanted standard out-of-the-box functionality, but they hadn't done the work upfront to align business needs, processes, and data to that model. Integration between finance and operations teams was very weak. Key processes, key end-to-end processes really were never joined up. Even something as foundational as data loads failed repeatedly, and poor data quality and lack of ownership meant the team couldn't move forward. And this led to some very challenging outcomes. So go live was delayed multiple times, and that really killed user confidence. And by the time it did go live, users were really disengaged, and many of the original promised capabilities were deferred. So this client ended up with a functioning ERP, but it wasn't a transformative one. And the program didn't fail outright. They did, after all, have a new ERP. It was working, but it fell well short of the value that it sought to deliver. And so the core lesson here is this foundational phase really matters. It's the space where you can surface misalignment before it becomes failure, and where you're really pressure testing the business case, challenging assumptions, and creating the right environment for standardization and change. And in this client's case, many of their results simply weren't achieved. And it's, again, not because the technology failed, but because they hadn't truly engaged the people. Users, again, were disengaged, leaders weren't aligned, and the business didn't feel ownership of the change. So let's break down a few reasons why ERP's Phase 0, this foundational phase, is critical for a successful ERP journey. So first of all, it helps detect risks early. So in this case, the client ran straight into issues that could have been predicted if they'd only placed more focus on risk during the discovery phase. And this phase is really where you uncover hidden risks, fragmented data, immature governance, cultural barriers, those types of things. And identifying them early means you can design around them. Second, alignment with the strategic business outcomes. So there was a fundamental disconnect between the ERP scope and the company's broader strategy. And this foundational phase really forces a reset. Why are we doing this? What does success look like? What kind of metrics and KPIs are we trying to achieve? And it really ensures that the technology decisions are grounded in strategy, not just functional needs. Third, effective program setup. So in this case, roles weren't clear, the team didn't have the right delivery experience, and leadership lacked alignment. And this foundational phase is really where you build that foundation, a realistic timeline, appropriate resourcing, decision-making structures, and escalation paths. And when we're thinking about appropriate resourcing, it's both from the right skill set and the right availability perspectives. So thinking through, do we have the right people for change management, technical expertise, process design, data, and reporting? Of course, Protiviti and Robert Half support clients to fill these critical gaps. So whether it's full end-to-end delivery of some of these work streams, interim support, or specialist resources to de-risk delivery, those are all elements that Protiviti and Robert Half can support. And finally, buy-in of key stakeholders. So in this case, users didn't believe in the program. The go-live had been delayed many times, and they lost trust. And this foundational phase is really your window to get real engagement, bringing in those key voices into the design, managing expectations, and building change champions across the organization. So again, think of ERP as not just a technology implementation, but really an enterprise transformation. And this foundational phase is where you make sure that the transformation is actually delivering. So let's continue with a polling question to better understand where your head is at. So what is your biggest blocker heading into ERP implementation phase 0? So here are your choices, and we'll give folks a couple seconds to respond. All right, just a couple more seconds. Seeing some responses come in. Again, what is your biggest blocker heading into an ERP implementation phase 0? All right, let's see how the group responded. Interesting. So we've got two leaders here. Lack of clarity on business objectives and scope, and data quality and readiness. And these are certainly consistent with what we hear when we're speaking with our clients and those in the market. Mahendra, it'd be great to hear your perspective on how you would practically address some of these concerns in the foundational phase. So I'll toss it over to you.
Thanks, Michael. So I guess, Michael, an interesting case study in terms of what went wrong in one of your examples. I guess before I talk about the framework, maybe let me share with another example where things actually went right for this particular client, and they pretty much had a successful implementation. So this was a client which operated across 4 different business lines, had presence across different warehouses, across 40 or different warehouses across multiple countries, global presence, as well as more than 1,000 plus users for operating the entire system. They were on a SAP ECC environment, a 20-year-old environment, highly customized, basically made fit for purpose for that particular organization, to the extent that they had almost probably more than 10,000 plus customizations in the environment. And so the users were to the extent that everybody would talk more in terms of a language of a custom transactions when they were doing their business process transactions, and nobody really knew what the core standard out-of-the-box functionalities were. So as part of the reset, the company decided to move to a new ERP platform. And the first and the foremost thing was in terms of defining the right governance structure and the governance leadership, to the extent that the entire typical steering committees were finalized for the whole program right on day 1. And there were not a single steering committee missed, which were like fortnightly. So being attended by the entire leadership on the day, not a single one being shifting. 2, I guess it was clear in terms of defining the objectives of the program and the value realization from the program. And typically when we talk about value realization from these programs, the focus is mostly on around efficiency and in terms of cost reduction. But if you look at the real value realization in this particular case was how can we impact the top line, the bottom line from a business standpoint. And in this particular case, the company actually figured out 5 key KPIs which are core to the business, which any KPI that gets impacted would either add my top line or my bottom line. And every design, right from design of the program to the actual realization, the build and go live, every decision was looked at from a value realization, a cost, measure standpoint. So if the design doesn't result in a value impacting those KPIs, it went through multiple iterations. And with that focus in mind, the entire implementation went through to the extent that the implementation was fully in terms of adopting standard out of the box with very minimal customizations, went live on the go live date that was planned right on day one, as per the planned timelines. So absolutely no delay on the project. So what did they do right? In that particular scenario, they had the right structure, program structure, stakeholder commitment, and leadership right from day one. The entire focus from a business standpoint was on value realization and standardization. There was a huge focus on getting the data right from day one. And given the organization was coming from being users of a highly customized environment to moving to a system of standard adoption, that was a massive change from a user standpoint. And I guess putting those right frameworks in place to manage that entire change and for the whole program was foundational for that entire program success. So I guess if you look at some of those key elements, they were absolutely right, done at the start of the program, before even the program kick-started. And that actually resulted in them having a real smooth go live to the extent that obviously the benefits were realized in first 6 months, returning the entire cost or ROI in the program. So what are the key foundations when we talk about how for such programs? So if you look at the overall framework, typically for such, getting the phase 0 right, I think typically would evolve around 5 pillars, let's say if we can say. Right? Process, right? I think we've seen that organizations have been on various legacy environments. The processes probably are not keeping pace in terms of the growth of the business, or the technologies have evolved. The systems possibly are now outdated, and OEMs possibly, or the technology providers basically are also asking organizations to move to the latest platforms or the latest versions of the platform. However, the focus always ends up being more an ERP driven, whether it's a new platform or a technical migration or an upgrade. A lot of these are becoming driven through lenses of what the technology can offer, what the ERPs can offer. Whereas I think the key thing that is important here is to really do a fit gap in terms of the process. What are the current ways of working? What are the current process? What is it that can be really looked at? Basically standard versus build. What are the key processes which we can now automate? I guess we're talking about, embedding artificial intelligence in everything from a business standpoint, right from automation of processes to deriving the maximum benefits from the data as part of such technology initiatives. So identifying upfront the processes which can be automated. I think the change, right? We always talk about people and impact of change. And just really identifying the impact of these process changes on the current business, the people side of it, what's going to be my future targeting operating model, what's going to be the ways of working in terms of the future roles and responsibilities between different departments, functions, etc., is equally critical as part of setting this entire process foundation. An equal element, an equally critical element along with the process is the data. And it's interesting to see, the poll question that Michael just had. The second critical, challenge that we see was the data readiness and strategy. And one of the things that we've typically observed in such ERP programs is when such assessments are being made in terms of looking at a new ERP platform, whichever be the platform in this particular case, everybody talks about data being critical, but in terms of the real focus around data is something that's possibly left for later in the program once the platform's selected and once the implementation journey is typically started. I guess just knowing the data, what's available, what's going to be the entire strategy of data. We talk about data being the new currency. Data needs to be monetized. I think just having the entire data available, even for be able to utilize, let's say, maximum insights later once the new platform is in place, I think the decision needs to start right from the end as to what do you want to get as an outcome of the program, what's the final value that's need to be realized. And for achieving those objectives, you need to start looking at what's available from a data standpoint currently versus what needs to be further enhanced or added, and the sources of data, etc. So getting your right data strategy is critical. I think the second critical element, which is typically undermined in such scenarios, is also about how are you going to manage your data cleansing, readiness, when you embark on such programs, the roles, responsibilities around data, etc. And typically, when you get in later in the program, there's a realization that then there's a tooling requirement that needs to come in because the data is huge, cannot be done, or we need more people possibly to manage that track. And I guess it's equally important to even think from a tooling strategy right at the start of this program. The third critical thing is whether it's around process or data, it's important to really understand, have you got the right people on the program leading those various tracks in such programs? So identification of the right leadership to drive those program work streams in the program with enough decision-making capabilities. So a lot of times we've seen the people are part of the program, not necessarily the best persons to drive those programs, but possibly more in terms of people who can be freed up from the business to run those programs and work streams. And that obviously also can, a lot of times, have resulted in a lot of challenges. So as part of the framework, defining what that program governance structure should look like, identifying the right stakeholders, defining the right vision and objectives and strategy is pretty key in setting the foundation. The solution is all about what's going to be your deployment strategy. Right? We've seen various scenarios where organizations are moving from, let's say, a tier 3, tier 4 ERP to probably, let's say, a tier 2, tier 1 ERP, or clients are on SAP ECC moving to S4HANA because SAP is looking at customers to move to S4HANA, or clients on Microsoft Navisions, AX, etc. need to move to either FNOs, Business Central, Oracle to Fusion, and obviously there are, for even different ERP products, there are different versions where everybody needs to upgrade. So what the deployment strategy should look like, what's the integration architecture should look like, what should be your to-be future state design is equally important as part of designing the solution before even you embark on that entire journey of actual technical implementation. What's going to be your reporting or analytics strategy? What sort of security and controls are to be looked at to ensure that your system's going to be compliant from a future standpoint? All of that, again, are critical to embed as part of your solution design. So again, from a framework, Phase 0 framework standpoint, it's equally critical that we look at all of these aspects. The next key thing from a people standpoint is, and I've already talked about a couple of them, but it's having the right stakeholders for the whole program, not just at a stakeholder level, but at the various layers of program governance, whether it's program directors, program leadership, managers, people leading various work streams. So having the right people with the right skills and decision making is equally critical when you're setting up the whole program. Driving change. I think Charlotte talked about change. Michael talked about change being critical, and it's absolutely critical to work on the change work stream right from day one. In fact, identifying the impact of change, doing the entire change impact analysis right at phase 0 would help you in terms of setting up the foundations as you embark on the implementation journey for your ERP platform. So, there's a huge focus that needs to be given on your entire change impact assessment, change strategy upfront. Once you've looked at all these aspects, I think the critical thing then is, based on the impact on process, data, having looked at your overall solution design from change, what's going to be the entire implementation approach, the phasing of the implementation approach, your entire resource strategy. So one of the challenges that we've seen, and that's also come out in the polling question, is just being able to have the right level of resources, either to be put on part of the program, or if, let's say, you're moving people from the business to the program, just managing the BAU itself. So what should be the right resource strategy is equally important as part of your overall roadmap. Then, apart from the strategy, the phasing, implementation approach, it's all about value realization, business benefits, and defining the right program KPIs itself. So what the business case would look like, what's the business benefit that needs to be articulated right up front, the cost estimates, not just about the technical costs of implementation, but about around your entire people-related cost of not just, again, getting people from outside, but it's all your own internal people's cost who are typically put as part of those programs. The time commitment of people on such programs are equally important to assess the entire cost of the program, and not just probably cost of technical implementation, whether it's around license, infrastructure, implementation cost, etc. And at the end, I guess, if you've got the right strategy in place, if you've got the right roadmap with the entire phasing, resource strategy, the governance, I think heading into then selection of the right ERP platform, or doing the right system integrator selection is very focused in terms of you're going with very clear goals and objectives and very clear expectation as what you want to get as an outcome of the program. And we've had a couple of questions which have come through earlier as well, in terms of, what are the key factors that you should look at from selecting a system integrator, right? I guess the key thing, we always talk about documenting the requirements, applying the Moscow principles, looking at the product capabilities, credentials, etc. I think one of the key experience that I've seen, which has worked well, is I think giving an entire proof of concept approach, which are very similar or very critical to your business, I think, and expecting the partners to come and present a right solution which is more relevant to the business, I think has, at least in my experience, I've seen clients really benefiting out of it in the evaluation process earlier on the program. And I think that's equally critical when you're looking at in terms of your selection of your ERP or your system integrator platform. So I guess understanding how this the framework looks like and what are the key components of the framework, I think it's equally important to understand what are the benefits or outcomes of such program. And Charlotte, if you want to just talk about them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So absolutely, what should you expect from a foundational phase 0 for your ERP initiative? Well, ultimately, everything that Mahendra has just talked about, that should really be helping you to ultimately be able to set your program up to enable you to realize your business case and anticipated benefits. So part of the building of the business case and the roadmap and setting up the program to enable you to actually deliver on that and realize those benefits. And this means realizing the desired outcomes that are aligned with broader strategic business objectives, maximizing the value from your implementation initiative, better understanding, estimating, and controlling costs so that you can minimize the risk of incurring unknown and unexpected costs through thorough planning and well-informed assumptions as part of that initial foundational phase. Now, there are some well-known public stories of failure that I'm sure a lot of us will have heard of, and similar to the story that Michael set out earlier, as well as a number of compelling success stories, similar to what Mahendra alluded to earlier. And the core reason really for the successes is that the organization implementing the ERP solution looked beyond just the technology. They took the time to consider the other critical elements of people, process, data, setting out that roadmap, and importantly, establishing a well-structured program, roadmap, and business case, with the identification and prioritization of risks upfront to enable the effective management of these throughout the program. And as an example, and as a result of a successful implementation of a new ERP solution, a leading British consumer goods company was able to achieve 15% reduction in operational costs, improve sustainability through a 10% reduction in carbon emissions across their supply chain operations, improved process efficiencies across procurement, manufacturing and distribution, and greater standardization across their global operations. And this was all through a successful and a sustainable implementation of their chosen ERP solution. Now, this success was significantly bolstered by a well-executed Phase 0, which laid the groundwork for the entire project. And during this foundational phase, the company focused on aligning business objectives with technological capabilities, engaging stakeholders across various departments, and conducting thorough requirements gathering. This preparatory work helped identify key areas for improvement and ensured that the chosen solution would effectively meet the organization's diverse needs. The Phase 0 stage in this example was crucial in setting the program up for success by ensuring that the system was tailored to their specific requirements. And ultimately, this led to significant operational improvements and strategic benefits. And ultimately, this led to the organization achieving their business case, realizing those desired outcomes, maximizing the value, controlling the costs, and understanding and being able to manage the risks associated with the implementation. Now, we wanted to move on to some questions at this stage, and thank you so much to everyone that shared questions when they registered for this session in advance. And we've reviewed these, and there were some common themes coming from them, which is really great. We've included 3 questions here that we'll touch on in a minute, which we believe cover those most common themes. And I do see that there's a good number of questions coming in the Q&A inbox as well. So thank you so much for those. We will look to weave responses to some of those through our responses to your questions now. And as I say, we will make sure that we respond to those individually after the webinar as well. So I'll take the first question here, which is really around how you can get your employees on board for a change like implementing an ERP. And there were other questions as well that have come up in the chat, which is around managing resistance to change, and really how do you bring on board, key stakeholders. So for this, I think it's really important to go back to the fact that any organizational change, such as an ERP implementation, requires individual change. So that change at an individual and a team level to achieve that desired future state. So as you embark on a change journey, you first need to understand who exactly these individuals and these teams within your organization are, And you need to categorize the level of change impact across the individuals and associated teams through change impact analysis and people readiness analyses. Conducting these analyses upfront will set that baseline. So it's important to do that as part of the phase 0, as part of that foundational phase, to set that baseline. And that will form the basis for communications approaches, communications and change strategies. And it will enable you to target your communication approach and tactics and ultimately establish a really comprehensive, focused, tailored and targeted change management strategy and plan, which is focused around your different types of stakeholder groups. And when you're looking to bring employees on board for a change, and you are thinking and concerned about managing some of that resistance, you need to consider and align the broader organizational objectives to individual benefits and outcomes. And some of those outcomes will be beneficial and they will be positive, and some will be more challenging. And you need to consider all of those outcomes as you link the organizational benefits and outcomes to those. And you should set out a clear and tailored communication plan that starts early and engages individuals throughout that process. And you should follow the individual journey as you think about people readiness for change through the process of making them aware, making them clear and being clear on the reason for change, on driving desire for the change. And that's really critical and probably one of the most challenging areas is driving that desire at an individual level for change. Helping support knowledge and the ability to actually implement and adopt the change, and then reinforcing that. And that reinforcement can come, earlier on in the change process. And it's really about identifying and celebrating successes, even small successes and small wins as you go through that process, and trying to build momentum for change across those individuals and stakeholder groups. So incorporating this type of change and communication planning within a foundational phase will really help you to better understand potential impacts, assess individual readiness for change, and set your change management activities up for success. This will ultimately ensure the sustainable implementation and will make sure that the change is accepted and, most importantly, adopted across the organization. Mahendra, I wondered if you could just provide your perspective on this next question, which is around the most critical decision a business must get right in phase 0.
So it's an interesting question, Charlotte, and I think there are similar kind of questions that I can see in the Q&A chat. I guess if you look at the key foundation, as we talked about, is setting up the whole governance model on the program, right? I think to me, setting up the right governance model with the right leadership, right stakeholder involvement, which needs to be set up right in phase 0, is absolutely critical that business needs to get right. This is what would drive all the downstream implication, whether it's around scope, timelines, budgets, various aspects around accountability, whether it's around the system integrators or driving change, data readiness, pretty much everything. So getting that entire governance model with absolutely strong program leadership is absolutely fundamental and foundational for me, from my perspective, to get it right in phase 0. I think in absence of getting the right model, what typically tends to happen is there would be a lot of reliance or dependence, whether on the third party who might be involved in such programs, or there could be various other system integrators involved or responsible for delivery, where the objective is primarily to get the project delivered and done, not really ensuring, basically focusing on business value or outcome that would typically be, that needs to be, the focus on any such program. So to me, I think that's the most critical bit, which is important to set right. Why, I guess, so many get it wrong? I guess there are multiple reasons and factors, what we've seen and, in experience over years, right? And we've always seen there's always misalignment of priorities. How do you manage dependencies on business priorities versus technical priorities or the program priorities? Having the right ownership, as well as ensuring that the whole program is delivered to meet the business vision and outcome. I think there is a misalignment of priorities. There's always an underestimation of the internal resource load that such programs can take as part of implementations. So typically, I think it's always underestimated the effort and resource estimates that need to be put in these programs. And even not just putting the right top performers or the right leadership who can take the right decisions as part of the program also is the other key challenges that we've seen where others would have gone wrong. The third thing, which is probably critical, is a lot of these programs start with defining the right strategy, defining the governance model, but with possibly not a clear understanding of what the success criteria would look like. So agreeing what the success criteria post go live would look like is absolutely critical to get it right in phase 0, which again, in many such programs we've seen, people haven't got it right. Another important one is, which is again critical, right? If you look at typical project plans of such implementations, the focus tends to be more on going live as per the plan, rather than really focusing on, are you really getting the future outcomes, future state benefits that were desired at the start of the program? Whether the organization is really ready for go live, or whether the relevant processes, et cetera, are in place. I think there was a question around what's the right balance between standard versus custom. I guess that varies from organization to organization, complexities of business. And I guess that again becomes an important evaluation criteria at the start of your program in phase 0 itself. In one of my, in one of the clients, where we observed was the client was working on the ERP platform, old platform, rushed on saying we will go in an out-of-the-box standard system. Only 6 months down the line, realized that their existing as-is processes were so much customized, users were so much embedded into that ways of working, they were not even willing to change and adopt out of the box. And the whole, the program basically ended up customizing the entire functionalities to basically replicate as-is ways of working. So I guess getting that right target operating model up front, as well as identifying the candidates, the processes which should get standardized, not just from a tech standpoint, but if it needs to be standardized even from a business standpoint, is equally important upfront before you embark on such programs. Michael, do you want to look at the third one?
Sure. So this next question is about deploying assurance over the life cycle of the program. And when we're thinking about assurance, it's really about giving stakeholders confidence that the project is being managed effectively, that we're managing risks appropriately, and really that the program is on track to meet its objectives. Assurance really should be its own separate work stream, and we should establish it during phase 0. And that's really to ensure that we're setting the program up for success, and that assurance work stream should really support each phase of the program through design, build, deployment, hypercare, to again ensure that each decision that we're making throughout the program is aligned with the plan that we established during phase 0. So a couple things to consider when considering setting up an assurance program. Do we have a clear objective with success metrics, and do we know what success looks like? Have we executed a comprehensive risk assessment from the outset to identify potential risks, and do we have a framework to manage those risks? Have we engaged the right stakeholders, and how are we communicating them? And communicating with them early and often to really build trust and ensure that their concerns are addressed. Do we have a robust change management strategy? And that's really going to prepare users for the transition and minimize resistance, enhance adoption. Do we have the right performance metrics and monitoring to measure progress? And I saw a question in the chat about KPIs and how do we use KPIs to measure success of the program? And it really goes back to, why are we implementing this new tool? What sorts of transformation outcomes are we looking for? We often think of ERP success metrics on two different fronts, project delivery and business impact. So did we deliver it well? Is it making a big difference? And these metrics and KPIs, again, need to be aligned with the org strategy established upfront. So we typically see KPIs around project delivery. Did we go live on time, on budget? Were there minimal disruptions? What does adoption look like? Are users trained? Are they using the system? And then business outcome KPIs. Again, this gets back to, what were we looking to achieve? Are our processes faster? Is data cleaner? Are we able to make decisions more quickly? And is the ERP really driving real transformation? So a couple examples: finance, it might mean a shorter month-end close. Operations, you could consider, inventory accuracy or cycle time reductions. When we think about leadership, are we replacing Excel dashboards with real-time, interactive, data-driven dashboards? Again, a couple other items to think through when we're thinking through program assurance. You could consider an independent review at various stages of the process, just to ensure that we've got an objective assessment. And then finally, I probably wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention leveraging expertise, consultants, specialists, who do this all the time. They have deep expertise with implementations and can provide a lot of valuable insights to ensure that the project is set up for success and continues to trend towards achieving our desired outcomes. Mahendra, was there another question in the chat that you wanted to address?
I guess there's a question which is, what are the main challenges for a startup moving to an ERP? I think that's an interesting question, and I guess this again goes back to really looking at what are the real business outcomes and the values that you're really looking at getting out of the initiative, or let's say embarking on this entire ERP platform. For a startup organization, let's say, do you have the right processes, or do you just want to adopt the as-is what the application platforms would offer? I guess the key thing in such thing is not as much about what are the main challenges. I guess the key thing is really looking at whichever is the ERP platform, is that fit for purpose to really meet the business requirements, not just today, but probably, let's say, 3 years, 5 years down the line for the business. In a startup scenario, the processes can evolve. You may not have as much of data challenges to start with. And hence, I guess, the key thing becomes more in terms of adopting and ensuring that the product is fit for purpose for the business. So I guess a couple of other questions. Would you have any different approach for implementing a cloud-based ERP compared to an on-prem ERP? I think absolutely. The key thing lies, again, I talked about the entire deployment approach and deployment strategy as part of the entire phase 0. There are various considerations that would go into in really deciding what should be your the right ERP platform. Should it be on-prem versus cloud? There are various cost factors that come in decision making. There are various in terms of the processes, what a cloud-based platform can offer versus what you get from an on-prem base. So there are various considerations that go in. And again, that becomes a key consideration as part of your entire phase 0, basically arriving on your deployment strategy. So hopefully I've been able to cover that. Michael, I think I think there's similar things which we've covered as we've gone through this, but we're happy to take this separately just in the interest of time.
Maybe I'll just cover one more question here, which is around what is seen as a failure to implement an ERP system. And I think this links back to the sort of 70% failure rate that we've talked about. And so I think ultimately a lot of implementation programs can fail, due to cost, resources, time, overruns, failure to meet essentially the business case that was set out, either from a cost perspective or the inability to, realize the benefits and actually realize the benefits that are set out in the business case. So failure can kind of cover a whole host of different things. I think personally, the really sort of alarming statistic, as I mentioned earlier, is that 25% of, catastrophic failure, which is really to do with the sort of abandonment of the program or the kind of fundamental inability to actually deliver on the kind of foundational minimum benefits and objectives that were set out as part of the program. And so that is a real concern, because that is that is something to be concerned about and to challenge. And now understanding and setting out this foundational phase, this phase 0, will really help you to identify and prioritize the risks of failure, both on a smaller scale, but also on that kind of catastrophic scale. And that will help you to manage, mitigate where possible, but manage and understand and anticipate those risks, so that you can plan around that and you can take that into consideration and those risks into consideration when you are planning and you're building out your roadmap and your approach. So I think that's a failure can cover a whole host of different things, but I think it's that real catastrophic failure that is the alarming thing, and really can be helped to be managed and reduced as part of this initial phase 0. And the activities carried out as part of a foundational phase are not wasted, should not be wasted if you decide to move forward on a different path. A lot of those activities and the framework that Mahendra set out earlier, all of these activities are really valuable things to be doing, within your organization, in any case, from a process, from a people, from a future technology perspective. So it absolutely is a valuable exercise, actually, in and of itself. But importantly, it will help you to set, the future implementation programs up for success. Okay, Mahendra, should we
Yep.
takeaways?
I guess, so I think, we've talked about all the different risks on such programs. I think the criticality of the phase 0 framework, why it's important. I guess to summarize, I think it's important, plan carefully. The focus should always be on end state, business outcomes, and that should be driving your ERP journey. Invest in the right roadmap upfront. If you get it wrong, it's really expensive, and the costs and the ROIs can just go for, in the middle of the program itself, right? Your costs can spiral. It's important that you investigate impacts, the critical impacts on your process, people, data, your integration with the various other applications, what the landscape strategy should look like. Investigate those impacts much earlier, before even you start this entire journey. Right? I think consider innovation deployment, right? So it's not just as much about the platform. It's important, equally important, that you're considering continuous innovation as you're going and adopting the new ERP platform, whether it's around adopting various AI capabilities of the platform or even embedding it around the overall deployment. The key is start early with your entire data strategy, change adoption. It should start much earlier, even before your technical implementation. And that is a key foundation, which can lead to your strong foundation as you start your entire implementation.
Great. So that just leaves me really to say thank you again so much for joining this session today. And we hope you have found it insightful and interesting. And we hope that it has helped you answer that all-important question, which is, how do you make sure that you are not part of that 70% failure rate as you embark on your ERP implementation programs? So please do reach out to Mahendra, Michael, or me with any further questions, or if you would like to delve deeper into any of the topics that we discussed today. As I mentioned earlier, we will be following up individually on some of the questions that have come through on that Q&A chat as well. So thank you so much for everyone that has put those questions in the chat, and thank you for engaging in this session today. Thank you again, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.